Starving Toxicity, Transformative Life Changes Through Prayer, Fasting, and Celibacy. Written by Janae Butler. Narrated by Nia Confer. Dedications. I dedicate this book to my younger self. You fell for so many of the devil's traps, but landed at God's feet. As long as you have God, you will need nothing else. You can always start your first day. Whether you're changing a career, diet, or attitude, apply praying and fasting to your life. Don't wait for the perfect time. Just start. Romans 5:3, World English Bible Translation. Not only this, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces perseverance. Part 1. Immorally Unfulfilled. Chapter 1. You don't get to choose them. People love good testimonies, myself included. It's no secret that testimonies are powerful tools that can inspire and uplift people of all ages, cultures, and backgrounds. Hearing where God has led a person reminds us of his faithfulness, graciousness, and capabilities. Most of the testimonies I heard were always about recovering drug addicts, porn addictions, and change medical diagnoses. I didn't have any of those issues, so I never thought I would have a testimony worth sharing until God saved me from a vicious cycle of sexual sin and toxicity. Toxicity refers to behavior that is harmful or detrimental to yourself or others. It was difficult for me to recognize my behavior because it was a result of deeply ingrained patterns and past traumas. I was a content, lukewarm Christian, meaning I professed myself as a Christian but was not committed to the Christian lifestyle. Growing up, my family went to church every Sunday. Gaining my independence as an adult, the church was the first thing I eliminated. It was boring, and the Christians around me were the biggest hypocrites I knew. My childhood church was the first organization that gave me trauma. I maintained a relationship with God by praying, but was very comfortable with my sinful lifestyle too. I didn't consider my lifestyle a problem because I prayed daily and asked for repentance. My mentality was to sin and ask for forgiveness. The end. Once I asked for forgiveness, I never attempted to change. Change never crossed my mind. Revelation 3:15 through 16. World English Bible Translation. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Audaciously, I had no doubt in my mind I was going to heaven, even if I had never read my Bible. The book knocked me out faster than melatonin. I only opened my Bible when I was in church, but had not been in over 10 years. My lifestyle was no different from the other Christians around me. In my world, it was normal for Christians to commit an insurmountable amount of sins, then go to church on Sunday or pray without changing. I wasn't hurting anyone, so I didn't see a problem with my lifestyle. In fact, because I prayed, I thought I had the upper hand compared to people who didn't know God at all. I cursed like a sailor, listened to secular music, enjoyed gossip blogs, and a host of other sins. Sex was my go-to sin of choice. Dare I say, my favorite sin. It was one of the sins I wanted to give up slowly and gradually, if at all. I was not promiscuous, but I was not pure either. Before I begin, let me preface by saying my life was chaotic, but it was my normal. From a young age, I learned to adapt to ever-changing circumstances and unpredictable situations. Whether it was heartbreak or dealing with unexpected family drama, I became accustomed to the chaos that surrounded me. I embraced the uncertainty and found comfort in the familiarity of dysfunction. I'm not sure if I loved or hated my life. There were times when I was really happy, and other times when I felt like I wanted to die. My life was very flawed. As I aged, I hated the person I was in my younger years. I was a damaged, maladjusted, and irrational person. I was so used to living for survival, wrapped in dysfunction, it was the only way that I thrived. In science, you're told that likes attract likes. I attracted negativity. My childhood upbringing played a significant role in shaping my identity as an adult, so it's necessary to explore my family history. Although some may perceive my family as sizable, I felt that it was insufficient. While I was fortunate to have both of my parents alive, the relationships were comparable to the fragility of withered rose petals. My mother had me at a young age. I often felt like I grew up alongside her. We shared a close bond until I turned 19. Overlooking her imperfections, I loved her deeply. However, our home was far from ideal due to the constant physical abuse my stepfather inflicted upon my mom in front of my siblings and I. This was the first toxic relationship I was exposed to, and it caused significant damage. The relationship also led to our isolation from extended family. For whatever reason, my mom always went back to him. She was stuck in her matrix and produced many children in the process. Naturally, she was very submissive and lacked the backbone to stand up for herself. As I grew older, it became clear that my mother had to choose happiness with her children or her husband, but she could never have both, which divided our household. Nonetheless, we would attend church every Sunday, putting on this facade of a loving, blended family. From this, I learned that it was acceptable to live amidst chaos as long as I didn't appear chaotic. My mother's abuse stopped around the time I approached my teenage years. I didn't appreciate my stepfather as a teen, but I gained respect for him for stepping in to help my mom once the abuse stopped. My siblings did not have the same sentiments, so there was a lot of turmoil. Later in life, my own experiences dating men with children taught me how challenging it can be to assume the role of a step-parent. This realization helped me understand the difficulties my stepfather may have faced. Although her divorce left her with nothing, it was one of the happiest days of my life. I was hoping for a new start. My siblings and I came together to help my mom rebuild her life. I was proud to see her progress. However, less than 6 months later, she was with another controlling man to whom she willingly submitted to. She married him after 2 weeks of dating. He was worse than her first husband in many ways, as he dictated every aspect of her life. I had developed so much PTSD from her previous marriage. I couldn't accept her new husband's control and the new persona she had developed. I chose not to stay on the roller coaster of life with her anymore. I looked up and 15 years had passed since we last spoke. I had a stronger bond with my dad's side of the family. Our family unit was close until our matriarch, my grandmother, developed health issues. My dad lived in another state, so I rarely saw him. He was incarcerated during my teenage developmental years, which profoundly impacted his life. Prison hardened my dad and stunted his mental growth. His mentality made it difficult for me to engage in meaningful conversations of substance. Although my dad said he loved me, he was very selfish. I was left disappointed whenever I needed him to come through for me. I was always trying to repair what little was left of our relationship, but he counteracted my actions. It took years for me to admit that I had daddy issues. I didn't think it was possible because I knew and grew up with my father. Through therapy, I was taught that you can't tell someone how to love you. You must look at how they love, consider their actions, and decide if you want to be loved that way. His love was painful. By studying our relationship, I grew to understand that I was drawn to men who loved and treated me how my dad treated me, and I hated him for it. I didn't hate him for my attraction. I hated him for exposing me to the style of love he gave. Our relationship was strained and required multiple hiatuses for my sanity. I was very close to walking away from him for good. My relationships with my siblings were equally troubled. Our childhood was very rough. With me being the oldest child, I felt like my siblings were my children. At times, they depended on me more than my parents. I was forced to clean up their messes. By the time each of my siblings turned 16 to 18 years old, they were no longer living in our family home. We were forced to figure life out without any help or handouts. This hardened us. We had so much anger built up, but let it out differently, causing many conflicts. I was fed up with living in dysfunction, so once I would have a falling out with one of them, I would sever the relationship in my adulthood. 5 to 10 years would go by before I would speak to them again. I always had to figure everything out for myself. No one cared about my problems or helped me. I would become so disconnected and lose respect for anyone displaying vulnerability. In my eyes, they were weak. In actuality, they were human. Trying to suppress my vulnerabilities caused me to release toxicity. Expressing my grievances to my therapist, I was told, you don't get to choose your family. Friends are the family that you choose. I had never heard that statement, but it held true in my life. I found friends that provided a sense of belonging and support that I was lacking in familial relationships. I held these bonds in very high regard, but they were oftentimes one-sided. Chapter 2. Recurring Wounds. Content trigger warning. This passage may contain references to abuse, addiction, and mental health struggles. Skip approximately 70 seconds ahead. I was in therapy trying to determine where my problem with sex was delineated. It caused me to go back to my childhood. Around 5 years old, I was staying at a family member's house while my mom went out for the night. An older cousin at the time was watching my teenage cousins, my little brother, and I. Because I was the only girl, I often played by myself. Somehow I was lured into a room where the teenage boys took turns molesting me. They even forced my brother to participate. Despite not being penetrated, the interaction was traumatic and confusing. I couldn't understand why they would do that to me. In the aftermath, I was left feeling stressed and overwhelmed. It awoke something in me that I was not mentally, physically, or emotionally prepared for. As a result of the incident, I masturbated to expel emotions when I was stressed or overwhelmed, the two sensations they left me with. My childhood environment was very taxing, so I often masturbated to relieve stress. As I grew older, masturbation turned into sex. Content trigger warning. Resume reading. My parents were very strict when it came to boys, particularly my mother. She had conceived for the first time in her early adolescence and didn't want the same life for her children. She made saying no sound easier than it was. She constantly had talks with me about not having sex or becoming promiscuous. We never discussed what would happen when I did, how to set boundaries, or what to expect from a man in relationship. I didn't have the best examples in front of me. I had to figure it out on my own. The Bible teaches us to avoid sexual immorality, including fornication. Growing up, I never fully grasped the gravity of this warning. As I reached adulthood, I found myself engaging in sexual activity outside of marriage, believing it to be a natural and harmless part of life. However, it wasn't long before I realized that my actions had significant consequences. Sex exposed me to an emotional and psychological vulnerability I was unprepared for. It deeply impacted my life, affecting not only my relationships, but also my sense of self-worth. In life, we're often presented with choices that can either lead us down a path of safety or reckless abandonment. The allure of the latter was too strong to resist, leading me down a road of excitement, danger, and uncertainty. My thirst for adventure and disregard for consequences led me on a path of self-destruction. Looking back, I now understand the importance of the Bible's warning against fornication and the significance of reserving sex for marriage. I was a virgin until my senior year of high school. I fantasized losing my virginity would be sweet and romantic with my husband, but that was a mirage. Lamentably, it was quite the opposite. I was so stressed by the level of chaos that occurred in my family home and needed an escape. Sex seemed like an appealing distraction to take my mind off my family controversy, so I called my boyfriend. Contrary to my fantasies, my first time was only an activity to decompress my emotional state. No romance was involved. He was unmoved. He had taken my virginity and became frustrated that I did not perform as an experienced partner would. He was battling his own demons and relied on sex as a coping mechanism too. We were two teenagers transferring trauma bonds and forming soul ties that would take years to break. While on my way home, I stumbled upon text messages he'd sent to another girl. I asked him about it, but he lied. I learned the hard way condoms don't protect your heart. Eventually, I discovered he was cheating on me. Perplexed and devastated, I validated two philosophies. 1, all men cheat. 2, you can separate sex from the man. These two ethics caused me a great deal of strife from the ages of 18 to 28. Eventually, I became an adult with the same grievance. Because I birthed the notion all men cheated, I concluded this was an issue I would have to go through regardless of who I was with. He wasn't physically hitting me, and this was something I heard most women would experience, so I stayed. Naively, I thought he would grow out of it. And I didn't want to be perceived as being promiscuous by finding another relationship. I didn't realize what I was doing to my self-esteem and value at the time. When I finally noticed what I had done, both were depleted. Once he went to college, he came back more advanced sexually. He commanded me to have sex with him in a very specific manner, and I obliged. I no longer liked him. I just wanted sex to relieve my stress. Sex was a drug to me, and I was addicted. Sex gave me the high that I needed when I needed it. The high I got from sex was better than anything I'd ever experienced. While I was having sex, I didn't think about my problems. I was focused. Orgasms were moans of freedom. Kisses tasted like peace, and passionate embraces felt like love as I was penetrated with purpose. As soon as I climaxed, it felt like my problems and stress oozed out of me. Sex made me feel great on a good day and impartial on a bad day. Good sex caused me to stay in bad relationships longer than I needed. Sex clouded my morals and judgment. I had to separate the men from the sex. Separating the man from his sex implied I could hate a man but love his pleasure. In truth, I was just showing a man how low I would go for sexual relations. With this rationality, I learned how to accept men's lies and push away fickle affection. Spending time and having conversations were obsolete. I didn't need to hear a lie. I knew what he really wanted. Truth be told, I wanted it too. I guarded my heart but gave my body. Essentially, I was convenient to him. From that relationship, I ended up with a man 10 years my senior. I thought age was only a number, but I was not prepared for the complexity of his deception. He was more experienced, so he knew how to please me better mentally, emotionally, financially, and sexually. Following the instructions of my previous boyfriend, I was able to satisfy him. Around the time I met him, I stopped talking to my friends and my family. I had no one and was very susceptible. He became my everything. 1 year into our relationship, his wife called to inform me he was married and I could have him. According to her, I was one of many. It wasn't my intention to be involved with a married man. I didn't know he was married when I met him. I was so used to accepting lies, I never thought to question his truth. Nonetheless, I should have ended things, but I was so emotionally involved by then that I decided not to. I couldn't afford to lose him. I didn't have anyone else. Eventually, he left his wife, and we were together. One of many. I scoffed. He injected me with all my favorite drugs: attention, sex, and companionship. He gave me a high I felt like I could not find anywhere else. As I aged, I noticed sex was the only thing I enjoyed about the relationship. I became bitter that I sacrificed most of my 20s and morals for him. I was miserable. As a result of my staying, I ended up making a lot of mistakes in this relationship, which caused me to experience depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. By the end, I was so drained, but full of insecurities. In my older years, I grew to understand how much it took to keep a family together, and I hated that I helped contribute to the destruction of a family. Although I had physically, sexually, and mentally left the relationship, the guilt overcame me. I vexed. This was a large reason why I had not been married by this time. I purged the man from my life and made a vow to God that I would never have sex with him again. My depression and anxiety were largely due to regret. A wise woman once told me, depression is the regret of your past, anxiety is the uncertainty of your future, and worrying is like paying interest on a debt you may never have to repay. I was depressed by my family issues and the mistakes I made with this married man, but going through the motions. I was constantly reliving the mistakes I had made because I felt they ruined the course of my life. The guilt of my past was spilling over into my sleep. Nightmares about the outcome of my life kept me up. It felt like I was trapped in a cycle. At times, suicide appeared to be the only option to escape. I wanted to die for 3 to 5 years. Well, I didn't really want to die. I wanted to stop what was no longer in my control. For the longest time, I was ashamed to confess my sins to God, even though He was aware of everything. People were begging me to help them live or telling me how precious life was consistently at the cancer facility I worked at. Meanwhile, I was trying to debate if my life was worth living. It seemed like I was being mocked or tormented for wanting to die. It made me feel so ungrateful. Seeing the patients try to piece back their life after being faced with an illness out of their control made me wonder, why them? What did God want to do with me? I believe He placed me there to help me recognize the worth of my life. I couldn't grasp its value. I presumed that I was too great of a sinner, and God was so displeased with me that it was better to continue my crooked path. Comforting and concealing the dark spots in my life, I found my identity in my appearance, accolades, achievements, and assets because I understood their value while not knowing my own. I learned how to suppress the parts of myself I didn't want to deal with by indulging in vices or guilty pleasures. However, nothing seemed to fulfill me for an extended period, besides sex. First, I tried to bury myself in work so that I could afford to indulge in retail therapy. Experience in the corporate world taught me that if you don't own the company, you're disposable. So I adapted a work style to fit in with that reality. I also learned with money, no matter how much you had, it was never enough. Alcohol and going out no longer satisfied me. I needed to take it up a notch. I tried drugs to numb my pain. No, not the hard stuff, just marijuana. I purchased edibles while vacationing in California. I misread the serving size and ate more than I should have. 600 milligrams later, I was so high that I thought I was having a heart attack. My heart was racing and felt as if it was going to explode. I was praying and asking the Lord to bring down my high and my heart rate expeditiously. I chugged a half a gallon of milk to break my high, but it didn't help. I wrote a will and said what I thought would be my last prayer. As I drifted to sleep, I was under the impression I was dying. Unexpectedly, the next day I woke up, feeling the air hit my skin, seeing a butterfly fly, and being able to walk was such a beautiful experience. Anything I would usually take for granted felt majestic that day. I had so much gratitude. It was at that point that I realized drugs were not for me. I thought I wanted to die, but the thought of me actually coming close to death and being given a second chance at life helped me discover therapy. Even with having many walls up, I began to see progress. After my last entanglement, I decided I just wanted to date to find what I liked in a partner. Now equipped with social media and online dating, the number of options were limitless. You could literally search through digital catalogs and order a person. I had gone through periods without sex when I was not seeing someone consistently, but this was no longer the social norm. Casual sex was more acceptable, but I didn't feel comfortable participating. For a period, I was a serial dater. I would stop talking to a man at first sight of a red flag. Finally, I established a relationship with a man I thought I could be with, only to discover he was also a married habitual liar. I no longer wanted a married man despite doing it before. Embarrassment and shame caused my depression to skyrocket. I kept attracting the same man in a different body. I could not figure out what they saw in me. I didn't know if it was my brokenness or insecurities. It seemed like men could recognize whatever they saw in me instantaneously. I explained how I was hurt in the past. I told them I didn't have any more in me to give, but they insisted on taking from me. Why damage me more? What more did they want from me? I clamored. I elected to terminate my dating efforts. My greatest desire was to get married, but I was held back by my fear of dating. I struggled with setting healthy boundaries, and as a result, they were either too lenient or too strict. I didn't trust my decision-making. I still longed for a partner to rescue me from my misery through marriage, which was a misguided and unhealthy perspective. Although I attempted to accept my singleness, I still had needs. Conforming to culture, I began to rely on a friend with benefits to satisfy my sexual urges, which he did. His patience and approach to me was inviting. He observed how distant I was outside of sex and said it caused him to lose interest. I was mortified because that was the only way I knew how to be. I was so guarded because I was used to being hurt. I only knew how to sabotage love and affection and invite pain. I didn't know how to identify with any healthy emotions in a relationship. Eventually, I began to love him, and I was ready to slowly let my guard down, but he was not willing to wait. Most situationships fizzle out over time. Mine was no different. The priority response time ceased, miscommunication ensued, and reality set in. I was constantly checking my Wi-Fi connection to make sure I hadn't been disconnected, making sure my apps were refreshing, and confirming my phone had a signal. He was really gone. I felt an emptiness that I told myself I would not experience again. This hurt me for months because I thought he understood me. Originally, I was hiding my truth so that I would not lose respect from my therapist. Following this heartbreak, I gained the plight needed to break the barriers and really work on myself through therapy. Evident my life was lacking purpose, I began to explore different interests that could potentially give my life more meaning and wealth. Feeling this void, I took an interest in developing an app. Although I hired a team for development, I also wanted to learn to code. I found some great teachable content online to help me learn to code, but my mind felt clouded. Whenever I began to watch a video, my mind drifted so fast that I didn't remember what I had watched. When I would replay the video, my mind drifted faster than before. I'd experienced a variety of changes at once. It was hard for me to focus and become acclimated to my new life. During the pandemic, all of my friends closest to me had gotten into relationships or had children. My group of childless, single 30-year-old friends now had families of their own. I found myself feeling alone. I believe God was removing distractions from my life, but I interpreted it as punishment. Observant of my isolation, I joined a few female social groups and mixers to help find friends near me. Instead of embracing the solitude and taking time to reflect on my life, locating a genuine group of girlfriends appeared to be more complicated than finding a partner. Optimistically, I befriended a few ladies. All the dinners, lunches, and brunches resembled dates. I was eating horribly. I assumed my diet was the cause of my lack of focus. Unyielding, I instituted a healthy diet and began to work on my body. I purchased a new wardrobe of sexy outfits and learned how to apply my makeup professionally. I used my social media mainly to watch people around me and immerse myself in social media gossip blogs. With my new look, I felt like a new person. Social media became my platform to showcase my newfound confidence and body. Posting on social media became my new vice and distraction. Social media is dangerous because it gives you a false sense of reality. Whatever you want to envision yourself as or believe, social media will help you connect with people who have the same beliefs around the world. I was becoming my alter ego. My DMs agreed and the likes validated me. Posting became my drug of choice. I would post a story and checked who viewed my post throughout the day religiously. Once my new crush viewed my post, I was on to posting the next sexy picture, meme, or inspirational thought. Chapter 3. Sin Sent Me. While searching for coding content, videos in my YouTube suggestions appear with people recanting the moments they died. I'd never died, but after eating my marijuana-infused edible, I was convinced I crossed over to the other side to some degree. Curious to know if their viewpoint was anything like mine, I clicked on the videos. Shockingly, the people were proclaiming their experiences in heaven or hell. I was cast down a rabbit hole of their encounters with God. A video stood out to me with a man saying God sent him to hell because he refused to forgive someone in his life. According to him, God told him, "Since you could not forgive that person, I can't forgive you." Wow, you can go to hell for that, I thought. My mind drifted to the roster of people I needed to forgive. Then a referenced Bible verse interested me because it was similar to a meme I'd shared with my followers earlier. This completely got my attention. I was looking for more memes that possibly came from the Bible, so I ended up reading the full book of Proverbs. I came across more memes, but what really intrigued me was that some verses highlighted issues I recently encountered. Reading this chapter earlier could have saved me a lot of headaches. Nevertheless, the immoral woman, Proverbs chapter 5 and 7 reference resonated with me. The proverb spoke against what is now culturally accepted behavior from women. Whether it was due to societal pressures, personal experiences, or a combination of both, my actions were that of an immoral woman. Skimming several other books of the Bible, I realized the life I was living was sending me on a highway to hell. Reading my Bible altered my perspective on life faster than expected. Each day I began to humble myself, absorbing how much sinning I was doing, both knowingly and unknowingly. Ample Bible verses I came across were directed toward me with conviction. From the way I treated people to my lack of grace and the way I handled my stress, I was impure. My heart was tainted and my actions were immoral in God's eyes. I was condemned with a slight urge to change, but I needed to take baby steps. There were some sins I was not ready to give up, specifically sex. After going through my last heartbreak, I had a hard time deciding whether or not I would become celibate. Ultimately, I wanted to get married, but I was unsure of how I wanted to navigate my life in the meantime. While I was single, celibacy wasn't a top priority for me. Once I entered into a relationship, I planned to take celibacy seriously. The idea of entering into a relationship without knowing if you were sexually compatible was not an option. Poor sexual performance was an instant deal breaker for me. Conversing with my crush, I realized that the topic of sex was bound to arise at some point. Therefore, I needed to make a decision and set clear boundaries beforehand. I met my newest crush during my serial dating phase. He was handsome, and from afar, he had his life together. He wanted to date over the years, but it was always bad timing. I really liked him, but I was dealing with emotional wounds that required healing. I wasn't interested in pursuing a romantic relationship. I was hesitant he would discover my vulnerabilities before I had a chance to address them. Because I was posting excessively, we were engaged in conversation and flirting more than usual. I liked the attention, but was not ready to entertain a man. Unbeknownst to me, I received an intimate picture from him. Unsolicited nude pictures would usually grind my gears, yet the image staring back on my screen enticed me. It felt like my drug handler just flashed high-quality drugs at me, and I had not had a hit in a while. I was fiending. Turning him down and flirting was easier before he sent me the picture. Instantaneously, I knew I was not ready to stop having sex. I had arranged to meet up with an associate from elementary school for drinks, but an hour later, I received confirmation that she wouldn't be able to make it. Coincidentally, the restaurant was in close proximity to my crush's house. I called and asked him to join me. He suggested we had drinks at his place since he was in the midst of moving. As I contemplated whether or not to accept the invitation, my conscience or a higher power seemed to be trying to communicate with me. However, my thoughts kept drifting towards the idea of having sex with him, causing me to weigh the pros and cons of celibacy. I ordered some drinks to loosen up and gather my thoughts. I drank the last gulp of my second drink and responded, "Send me your address." After settling my bill, I lingered in the restaurant, feeling confused about my state of mind. Even though I was not intoxicated, coordinating my steps felt like a struggle. I was in a tug-of-war with my footsteps as I made my way to the car. Half my body seemed reluctant to move while the other half sprinted. Eventually, I managed to reach the driver's seat. Feeling apprehensive, I prayed to God for guidance and a way out if my presence there was not meant to be. 45 minutes after receiving his address, I found myself standing in his living room, watching him unpack boxes in his new place. Listening to him talk about his life heightened my attraction towards him. Nevertheless, my mind was in turmoil, with conflicting thoughts battling it out inside my head. One voice urged me to make a move and pursue what I really wanted, while the other urged me to end the evening and go home. Feeling anxious and disengaged from the conversation with him, I tried to maintain my composure. My mind was telling me to leave. My body was reluctant to go. My feet were planted. I sat glued to his couch, deciphering what would be my next move. 2 hours later, he said, "It's getting late and I'm tired. Do you want to spend the night or are you going home? I didn't realize the amount of time that passed, but I knew he was insinuating sex was next. Home, I replied abruptly. 2 Timothy 2:22, World English Bible Translation. Flee from youthful lust, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Despite initially thinking I wanted to stay, I realized I was actually looking for a way out. God was speaking to me, and I couldn't find peace in the thought of giving into temptation. Verses from Proverbs 5 and 7 kept replaying in my mind, reminding me of the importance of staying true to God's teachings. Although my body craved sex, my heart knew that it was wrong in Christ's eyes. Ultimately, I realized his question was the opportunity to leave that I had prayed for. I got into my car and drove home, praying and expressing my gratitude to God. Ironically, the decision not to have sex with him that night ended up having a profound impact on my relationship with God. At that point, I had only been reading the Bible for a week or two, and I wasn't necessarily seeking any major changes in my life. However, something shifted within me, and I found myself submitting more and more to God's will. Rather than resisting the changes that were happening within me, I began to embrace them wholeheartedly. I yearned for an even deeper, more intimate relationship with God. I began studying the Bible more closely, seeking to understand what it had to say about sex, lust, and fornication. However, as I read more and more verses that condemned sexual sin, I found myself struggling even more with my desires. Strangely, reading about the biblical stance against fornication only seemed to make me crave it even more. I was deeply frustrated, both sexually and mentally. I longed to be with just one man, but every time I met someone new, they seemed to come with baggage that I didn't want or couldn't handle. As I continued to read the Bible, I grew increasingly angry and frustrated. In particular, one verse stuck with me. The idea that simply thinking about sex with someone was just as sinful as actually doing it. Masturbation and watching porn carried the same weight too. This only added to my sense of confusion and despair. Matthew 5:27 through 30. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." Exodus 20:14. But I tell you that everyone who gazes at a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and throw it away from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members shall perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members should perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. I was left perplexed and upset, questioning why God had intervened to stop me from having sex with my crush if just the thought of it was considered a sin. It felt unfair and extreme, especially as I was already struggling to resist the temptation of sex. An hour passed as I laid in bed, fixated on this verse, unable to shake off my craving for him. I succumbed to the notion that if the consequence of sin was identical, whether I masturbated, entertained thoughts, or acted upon it physically, I was gonna do it. WYD, I texted my crush. Despite feeling guilty for already having sinned, I rationalized that I might as well get something out of it. As I drove to his house, conflicting emotions raged within me. I felt both anxious about whether he would exceed my sexual expectations and guilty due to the multiple Bible verses concerning sexual sin that raced across my mind. I overlooked each verse and proceeded to have sex with him. As soon as I got in my car, I repented for my sins, drove home, and went to sleep. Now more cognizant of my sins, I noticed significant shifts occurring in my life. Without delay, my mind began to cloud again. I drew blanks on most of the coding material I studied. My focus had gotten so bad that it was no longer beneficial for me to attempt to learn. The willpower and discipline I had to cut meat and dairy products out of my diet diminished. Suddenly, I had cravings I had not had in weeks. I experienced disruptive sleep and lost my enthusiasm to work out. To make matters worse, I was plagued with past feelings of regret and anxiety. had not fully grasped the immense influence sex had over me. After all, sex permeated every aspect of my life, from music lyrics to advertisements to casual conversations with friends. Modern culture glorifies the image of a promiscuous lifestyle and selling yourself to the highest bidder. We're taught to protect our bodies while we contaminate our souls. While you may receive temporary pleasure and success along the way, you will find yourself slighted, bewildered, and spread thin as multiple soul ties pull you in different directions. Galatians 5:19-21, World English Translation. Now the deeds of the flesh are obvious, which are adultery, sexual immorality, uncleanness, lustfulness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, strife, jealousies, outbursts of anger, rivalries, divisions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, even as I also forewarned you that those who practice such things will not inherit God's kingdom. Regret consumed me, and I contemplated the potential new soul ties I had unknowingly formed. I felt utterly dejected. Questions raced through my mind. Why have I found myself in this situation once again? Was it truly worth it? Do I not love myself? Tears streamed down my face as I felt trapped in an endless cycle. It wasn't until I started reading the Bible that I realized the extent of my toxicity. Doses of toxicity contaminated me from within and spilled out. I needed to get to the root issue. I knew I had to change, but I remained the same for so long. I felt stuck. I'm unclear why a change was scary if I knew my life could have a better outcome because of it. I realized that part of the reason for my hesitation was that admitting I needed to change meant acknowledging that I was the problem. The perfectionist in me could not handle myself being the problem. I wasn't ready to have that conversation with myself. When I was younger, I was toxic because that was all I knew. But now as an adult, I chose to continue that behavior. I built walls to keep out the negative energy, not realizing I was the source. Exhausted, I'd reached my breaking point. I sought a reset that would help me overcome my habits and detoxify my life. To purify my mind, body, and soul, I consciously decided to fast. My primary goal was to strengthen my bond with Christ and transform into a better version of myself. I strived to listen, comprehend, and personally experience God. I was prepared to abandon my toxic lifestyle and embrace a more positive and wholesome approach to life. On a whim, 6 months prior, my best friend and I decided to fast from food and pray for 3 days. During this fast, I was amazed at the amount of mucus my body expelled. At the time, I didn't think much had changed in my life. However, looking back, I realized that my life had transformed dramatically over 3 months. I regained my old self. My depression that had lasted for over 3 years decreased significantly, and I regained a will to live again. Chapter 4. Detox. Matthew 17:21, World English Bible Translation. But this kind doesn't go out except by prayer and fasting. Fasting involves voluntarily abstaining from something for a specific period. People fast for various reasons, such as weight loss, intermittent fasting, or to preserve their mental health by disconnecting from social media. However, fasting for God usually entails removing distractions to focus on your relationship while refraining from food and/or drink or anything else the Lord has commanded you to sacrifice. You're denying your body to help you develop greater self-discipline and self-control. Along with abstaining from food, you also incorporate prayer and reading the Bible to intentionally deepen your relationship with God. By engaging in prayer, you can establish communication with God, which can lead to greater clarity and concentration in your life, as well as fostering a more profound appreciation for humbleness and empathy towards others. It's essential to note that fasting without prayer is simply a diet. The primary purpose of fasting is to connect with the Creator. During a fast, you should not seek admiration or make it public. Instead, it should be kept as a personal and private practice. I refrained from telling anyone about my fast until it was complete. In my experience, therapy helped provide valuable guidance and insights and address my past trauma and emotions. However, I found that it lacked daily structure and accountability, and I struggled to make progress without a clear plan or goal in place. While therapy can be subjective, fasting is a personal and spiritual journey that I could undertake on my own terms. I found that fasting provided a structured approach to personal growth that therapy lacked. The act of abstaining from food required discipline and self-control, and it helped me confront my innermost thoughts and emotions without distractions. I couldn't hide from myself or shift the narrative to benefit me. Fasting forced me to be truthful and honest with myself. Fasting provided a direct connection to God, which allowed me to confront my true beliefs and values without the influence of a therapist's bias. After watching several testimonies online, I became aware of several types of fast, including the Esther, Samuel, and Daniel fasts. Unsure of which one to choose, I picked up my Bible and researched the stories to determine which fast was best suited for me. Absolute, Esther, no food or water. Normal, Samuel, no food, only water. Partial, Daniel, a raw vegan or modified diet. At first, I attempted the Samuel's fast, which consisted of only water. I felt closest to God during this time as I relied on Him for strength. Whenever my stomach growled or I felt weak, I prayed and read my Bible. However, I struggled to maintain the fast for 21 days, which caused me to feel defeated at times. Weight loss was slowly becoming a focus, which was concerning to me. I didn't want my motivation for fasting to be solely driven by physical outcomes. To ensure that my motivations and heart were postured in the right place, I decided on a hybrid of the Daniel and Samuel fasts. For the first 2 weeks, I did a partial fast, allowing myself to eat meals from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. During the final week, I switched back to a water fast, which I will discuss later. In addition to refraining from food, I also wanted to give up sex and social media. They too were distracting me, and I relied on them frequently. I didn't know it at the time, but they had become idols to me. I didn't want this fast to be just a 21-day challenge. I wanted to change my way of life and live for God. I chose 21 days for my fast because I believed that anything done for that length of time would become a habit. To accomplish this, I created a list of 21 things that I needed to change or discuss with God. Each day of my fast represented something I needed to work on, and I listed specific details and reasons for each item. My prayer list made my prayers more direct to avoid rambling. Disclaimer: you don't have to fast for 21 days, nor do you have to make a list. I did what God put in my heart. Talk to God and let Him guide you. Please seek the advice of a medical professional when selecting a fast to ensure you're healthy enough to pursue the fast of your choice. Be sure to discuss any symptoms you may have with your healthcare provider. I wasn't too sure if I was doing the right thing by fasting. I prayed, but felt like I needed to improve my faith in God before I could be qualified to fast for 21 days. The people I saw fasting appeared very anointed, righteous, and holy already. On the other hand, I was a half-hearted, unorthodox Christian with a sketchy past that never opened her Bible. I lacked faith that I could be changed. My depression and anxiety resulted from my reliance on my own understanding, rather than placing my faith in God. Similarly, my history of engaging in sexual escapades stemmed from a lack of faith and patience that the Lord would bring me a suitable partner. In a strange turn of events, I even found myself placing more faith in my zodiac sign than in God, which seemed ridiculous when I said it aloud. While discussing my pursuit with a family member who is an atheist, I was told, "I guess you don't believe in your God as much as you say you do." I was ready to rebuke her comment. As I delved deeper into myself, I realized she was right. It was a message that I needed to hear from an unexpected messenger. Despite my yearning for unwavering faith and trust, I found myself struggling to possess these qualities. Throughout my life, I received countless messages about the importance of having faith and trusting in the Lord. However, I never received clear guidance on how to actually cultivate those traits. Setting aside my confusion and uncertainty, I tried my best to envision what true faith in God would look like for me. I didn't know exactly how to get there, but I was willing to learn. Frequently, I spoke about my belief, but I lacked the discipline to approach Him for help. I complained to everyone around me, but I never spoke to my Creator. I figured He knew my heart and what was on my mind, so I never voiced my issues in prayer. I would preconceive my desired outcome and then utter words I disguised as prayer. John 10:26-27, World English Bible Translation. But you don't believe because you are not of my sheep, as I told you. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I did not know God, nor did I know His voice. I had the misconception that when He spoke, it would be a thundering, deep voice carried through the wind like Mufasa speaking to Simba in the movie The Lion King. I was waiting for this grandiose moment when God would call my name aloud and give me a profound revelation of some sort. As I continued to grow in my relationship with God, I learned that this is not how He communicates. Instead, the Lord speaks to us through various means, including people, circumstances, prayer, reading the Bible, and the Holy Spirit. It's not uncommon for God to utilize unexpected messengers to communicate a message, even though we might disregard them because of their unfavorable or conflicting convictions. It's crucial to pay attention to the message being conveyed rather than dismissing it solely based on the messenger. The following week, my objective was to acquaint myself with God. I developed a few new practices that promote regularity, discipline, and thankfulness to shape my mornings. First, I would yell, "Thank you, Jesus," at the top of my lungs as soon as I woke up. I used to begin my day by reaching for my phone before I reached out to God. Checking my notifications and social media was the first thing on my mind. However, I found that it often influenced my mood for the entire day. If I stumbled upon content I enjoyed or received a pleasant text message, it would make me feel happy. Conversely, if I encountered distressing news or a message from someone I didn't like, it would instantly put me in a bad mood. To combat this, I started a new routine by exclaiming, "Thank you, Jesus," first thing in the morning, which automatically lifted my spirits and put me in a more joyful mood. Deliberately, I made a conscious effort to communicate with God as soon as I woke up and before going to bed. This practice allowed me to start and end my day on a positive note. Next, I would start by saying a prayer and follow it up by reading the Bible. Following that, I made a habit of consuming uplifting content. I gained hope by watching people's testimonies or listening to a pastor's sermon. Still left with feelings of reservation, I prayed to God, asking for guidance on how to strengthen my faith and for a clear sign that I should continue with the fast. I hoped for a message from God that was so unmistakable that I could not ignore it. Minutes later, I received a text message from my sister's boyfriend stating that she had been missing for at least 4 hours. The news startled me. I watched a lot of crime shows, so I didn't know what to think. I instantly called into work and went on a manhunt to find my sister. After 30 minutes of searching, I was able to find her. I decided to go to work since she was located. I entered an elevator in the office. As the door shut, about 80%, a lady used her hands to pry open the doors like she was the Incredible Hulk. This caused the doors to open again. Another lady walked in behind her as the pair proceeded to have a conversation. Second woman: "Oh my God, you really trust that elevator would not hurt you?" First lady: "I don't know, I just have faith that I would not get hurt." Second woman: "I wish I had faith like that. It's like you trusted and knew you wouldn't get hurt." I've realized that the direction I had requested for my faith was given. Through witnessing a conversation between two women, God allowed me to gain the clarity I was seeking. It was evident that they were not aware they were being used as instruments, which made me smile. It's amazing how God can guide us through multiple circumstances to deliver a message. If I had not received the call about my missing sister and arrived late to work, I would have missed this moment. Even though what we're going through may not always make sense, God knows the beginning and end and will never lead us astray. This experience provided me with the confidence boost I needed to prepare for my fast. Thanksgiving was the following week, so I decided to start on December the 1st so that I could keep track of the days better and mentally prepare. Days leading up to my fast, God spoke to me and told me to start making notes about my journey. I obeyed him, but I was confused because originally I was doing a total fast, drinking only water. I knew I would not forget to deny myself food for 21 days. When I did my previous 3-day fast, there was not much to document outside of me being hungry and praying. Obviously, I was going to be hungry, weak, and tired this time. Staring at the blank pages in front of me, I felt overpowered by the millions of thoughts that raced through my head. I was uncertain about what to write down, and in truth, I had more questions than answers. Usually, I would make brief bullet point notes, but I didn't know what I was doing this for, so I wrote detailed notes to ensure I didn't miss anything. My mind was as fluid as the ink in my pen, and I found myself jotting down ideas without inhibition. After I had finished, I looked over my notes and was pleasantly surprised by what I had produced. Laying in my bed, reflecting on my day caused me to feel like the main character in the 90s sitcom Moesha. I didn't see the value in jotting down my thoughts and experience to such an extent during my fast. The idea of taking detailed notes seemed pointless, and I thought I would never revisit them. God spoke to me days later and told me to write a book. I had no clear direction or inspiration for what I was to write about. I was utterly confused. I assumed he had made a mistake. Writing a book was never a passion of mine. When I was 18, I attempted to write a book, but after just one paragraph, I realized that it wasn't for me. My existence on Earth was eventful, but the writing process took too long, and I lacked the patience to write a single page, let alone an entire book. The only instance where I voluntarily engaged in writing was when I crafted personalized notes for loved ones' birthday cards. While I found joy in doing so, I didn't want to make it a frequent occurrence. In search of guidance, I prayed and asked God for clarity.